From Acres USA, you are listening to the Acres USA podcast, a conversational podcast where we'll explore sustainable farming, regenerative practices, and the latest innovations in eco-agriculture with some of your favorite farmers and ranchers. I'm your host, Taylor Henry, the owner and CEO of Acres USA. Welcome to the Acres USA podcast. All right, today we're joined with Sam Knapp. Sam is a newer author. He wrote the book Beyond the Root Cellar. Beyond the Root Cellar is a guide that proves that with a little ingenuity, the savvy grower can successfully select, harvest, store, and sell vegetables throughout the off-season, providing their family and community the local food they need during winter months. So, Sam, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining us.
Excited to join you, Taylor. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
The first time I've spoken to a farmer from Alaska, so I usually ask folks what they're currently working on and how the weather is. So how is the Alaska spring so
Well,
far?
it's below zero this morning, and we still have 3+ feet of snow on the ground. So farm work is
Yeah.
a ways out right now. I'm currently doing my taxes, and
Well, that's nice that those two things
yeah,
don't overlap.
yeah, currently doing my taxes, and I have a few, maintenance related things. I'm planning on building one of those prone weeders that I can lay down on. So my thinning and weeding time I don't have to spend so much time crouching. That's on the docket.
Oh yeah. Nice. So do you have a little heated shop that you can work on things in the off
Yeah,
season?
I mean, it's kind of the space that I do my veggie storage and the packing and processing. We're getting to the very tail end of the CSA season. I have one kind of like small extra CSA delivery to make. So the storage shed's mostly empty and so I can move my projects in there.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the most interesting things about your book and this topic is the fact that, from a seasonal standpoint, CSAs are always considered very seasonal. And, folks are always sitting in the winter being like, I hope we collected enough money in the growing season to get us through the winter months. Um, so I think it's brilliant for this type of business model to do, what a lot of folks are already doing anyways, and then continue the
Yeah.
CSA model. Um, do you see this? Do you know of a lot of other folks who are doing something similar to this, or do you see it specifically, it's not just geographically targeted to Alaska, but do you see people being able to do this across the US?
Yeah, I mean, I so locally I have the market kind of cornered here. I'm the only farmer in I hesitate to say the entire state of Alaska, but I'm definitely the only one in the interior of Alaska that stores kind of a diverse range of veggies into the wintertime and sells them like through a CSA model or even at all selling. But I do know farmers across the country who are doing this at all sorts of different scales. And that was kind of through the process of writing the book. I interviewed several of them, but there are many more out there that already do this. But I think if you
Yeah.
go into like any locality in the northern U.S. or Canada, there aren't many farms kind of extending their sales season through storage, and I think it's something that many veggie growers could easily pull off with their existing infrastructure. That it's not a huge leap to get into it if they already have summer coolers and things like that set up.
Yeah. And they're probably already doing it for their
Yeah,
personal
yeah,
use. Most likely they're,
yeah. I have farming friends. Several farming friends just around me have, for their own personal use, they're using their summer cooler or they have a little root cellar. Yeah, so many folks already have the gist of how to do it down, but haven't taken it to the commercial scale.
yeah. So you farmed in Sweden, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Alaska. Did I miss any other
No, that's
places?
it. Yeah.
So what is some of your background? How did you, number one, what was the opportunities that led you to be able to farm, say
hmm
in Sweden, but how did we end up where we are right now?
Yeah, I didn't imagine that I would be a farmer. When was deciding what to do after graduating from high school and getting into college, I was really interested in engineering, and I spent a number of years kind of working towards biofuels was kind of the thing that I was into. So I have a degree in chemistry and I have a degree in physics. Um, and at some point in that, like after I graduated from college, I went to UW Stevens Point. Um, I got a grant to go do research and work for a year in Sweden. And I was working as kind of a research engineer on renewable energy and biofuels related projects, and found myself just like in an office every day, uh, spending all my time in front of a computer and just kind of realizing that like this isn't what I want for the rest of my life. And at that same time, there was this older couple that was coming to a farmer's market in town. I was living in Luleå, Sweden, way in the north. And I had just asked them one day if I could come help on the weekend, and just for free. Just I was trying new stuff, new experiences, and they said yes. And so I started going out to this farm, maybe an hour out of town. I would take the bus uh, and spending my weekends there helping out. And eventually, I asked them if I could stay on for a summer after I was done working, um, and just work for room and board. And they said yes to that too. And so that was like my first real jump into doing agriculture at a scale larger than gardening, uh, and it was really intense. There are good and bad things about that experience, but after that, I really knew that like farming is what I want to do for a living. This is what I was getting a lot more satisfaction from that than from my office job.
So one thing that's always interesting to me, I should really go back and actually get a
Yeah.
number on this, but of all the podcast episodes that I do, there's a large percentage of folks who are farming, in a different way that have an engineering
Mm-hmm.
background. Well, just the thing that's in an engineering type brain seems to translate really well to agriculture.
Yeah.
And when I bring this up to people, sometimes they don't really realize it, but it's a weird amount of folks that I talk with that have either wrote books
Hmm.
or are doing, some cool things that have an engineering
You
background.
know, I I've never heard that before, but I'm kind of not surprised by it. I think that uh, managing a business, first of all, and all the skills that it takes to do that with spreadsheets and data collection and records keeping, I think an engineering type brain, kind of like an analytical brain, it does well at that. But like in addition to just running a generic business, I think farming has a lot of opportunities to be creative and to like think of solutions to problems.
It's a problem
Yeah,
solving thing.
yeah,
Yeah. And that's like the core base of an
yeah,
engineer.
totally. I mean, if you're not a good problem solver, then you're not going to be a good farmer.
Yeah, for sure. So what made you farm a little bit in Sweden, make a decision that this is going to be your
Hmm.
future? How did you end up in
Wow, that was
Alaska?
a long road. Um, it's really I wouldn't say my wife's fault. It was really my wife's idea. She had spent some time living and working in this small coastal fishing town named Cordova. It's like an hour by plane from Anchorage, but you can only get there via boat. So she had fallen in love with life in Alaska. I had loved Sweden. If it wasn't for her, I wouldn't have returned to the U.S. Uh, and so for me, it was like the closest I could get to living in that high latitude zone and still being in the United States. And for her, she loved Alaska. And so after she was done with graduate school, uh, she was looking for jobs in Alaska, and that's what brought us here. Before that, though, I mean, when she was in school, her project was in Fairbanks, and so I came up with her one summer, and I worked on a farm here, and then we ended up living here. So we kind of already had a pretty good idea of what the community and the farming community around Fairbanks was like. Hmm.
Yeah. So how did you land on the farm that you guys have? How much? I guess
Yeah,
what's the scale of the
it's
farm?
going to be
You're a
laughably
little bit
small.
you're a little bit past the homesteader
Yeah, yeah,
movement, so you weren't able to go claim your land. Um,
yeah. Um, so it'll seem laughably small to many folks who listen to this podcast that our property is only 3 acres. We live in a neighborhood where kind of all the homes in that neighborhood are in the 2 to 3 acre range. But it's large enough to run, a profitable market garden style farm. Uh, the reason that we bought that property, so we arrived in Fairbanks in January and we were renting a little cabin, looking for a place to start a farm. And it was January of, or like January, February of 2020. So we didn't really know the pandemic was about to hit. It was a good thing that we bought our land when we did. But we kind of had a list of criteria that we were looking for. We wanted something that already had a house on it, and it needed to have a well, which isn't that common in Fairbanks. And it needed some land on a preferably south facing slope if it was going to be sloped. And there are a whole bunch of issues around this area with permafrost. Um, yeah, a lot of the larger acreage that is available is in low-lying or north-facing slope areas that have permafrost soils, and I mean we could spend an hour talking about just that. It's I'll keep it short that especially starting a new farm that you're going to be clearing land, you don't want permafrost. It's going to be a headache.
yeah, I would imagine. So what sort of challenges you cleared a
Yeah,
forested
yeah,
area and turned it into production fields? So what sort of, I guess, first of all, how was it,
yeah,
clearing that land, and then what sort of soil conditions were you left
yeah.
with?
Clearing the land was an absolute mess. It's something that I have. When you drive around the Midwest and you see all those established fields, now I think like, oh my God, what people went through to get those fields is amazing, especially that many of them did it without hydraulics. Um, yeah, I mean, it was just I hired a friend and I were on chainsaws, and then I hired a group of guys with bulldozers to come in, and so we just dragged trees, pushed stumps out, made large debris piles, and after we were done, we had probably 2 log decks with 50 cords each in them, and maybe a dozen stump piles that were like dump truck loads or more, sitting in the field. The soil around our area is all wind-blown silt, and it's it's more than 10 feet thick. I've dug down 10 feet while digging my building's foundation, and I didn't hit anything other than silt. I like to joke there's not a rock on the farm that I didn't put there. Um, yeah, so
Well, that's one
yeah,
positive.
I mean it's been I've had to spend the next few years, and I'm still doing it, soil building, because that silt really doesn't have much. And boreal forest has, maybe 2 to 4 inches of organic layer. We do the best we can to keep that layer intact when going through with the bulldozers. But you're also dealing with tree roots and stumps. It's just difficult to maintain those organics. But yeah,
Did you have to bring in loads of topsoil to go over top everything, or have you just been building up the existing
I've been
soil that you
mostly
had?
building up the existing soil that I had. There just aren't any good sources of topsoil around here. I did try to bring in like one dump truck load from, like the only made and local supplier, and it wasn't very good quality, so I decided not to spend my money on it. Yeah.
Yeah. What sort of deficiencies have you seen? What sort of
Yeah.
amendments have you been working on to put
Yeah,
on?
our soil, obviously very nitrogen poor. It's pretty phosphorus poor as well. Um, it's missing a few micronutrients. There's a lot of magnesium and calcium, but like boron is really low, and so you have to add borax to the soil to bring that up. Um, let's see, the pH. The native pH is usually in the mid fives, and so you have to lime it to bring it up. Yeah.
So were you actually having production the first year after you got the forest cleared, or did it take a year
Yeah.
to get
We
things
did
up and
kind of a
running?
mix of things. We were fortunate that the property we bought, had once kept horses in the forest in kind of a small, maybe quarter acre paddock. And so where that was, the soil was incredible. Although it did come with a preloaded with years of choking chickweed and quackgrass. Um, but everywhere else, uh, had to let rest for a year. And it was a practical thing too, that there were kind of enormous stump piles that we needed to burn away that would have gotten in the way of our production. So we had that small kind of quarter acre chunk that we put into production right away, and it did really well. But the rest of it took another year. And actually, there's still chunks of the field that I'm like, this year will be the final chunk that I expand to. The log decks are finally disappearing, and I've finally burned the stump piles away.
Did you try to do any sort of cover crop on that
I
ground right
did,
away to?
yeah. And it did really poorly in places that there was no organic matter. Even with adding nutrients to the or like nitrogen sources to the top, it, there just was nothing really for that cover crop to establish in. And when it did establish, it was really had big nutrient deficiencies. And Fairbanks has an
Yeah.
issue that uh, even though we get a lot of snow and it's very wet around here at times, especially in the early spring, we're a semi-arid climate, so it's not uncommon to get no rain like the entirety of May and June.
What is your frost to frost
Ooh,
dates?
I think so. Down in the valley, I would say June 1st to maybe September 1st, although it can frost at any time in those low spots. But we are up a couple 100 feet above the valley, so we escape some of those earlier and later frosts. I it's hard to say. I'd say late May through mid-September for us. Yeah,
That's
yeah, it's
pretty
not
good
bad.
then. That's not
The
that
the thing
crazy.
is that
Um,
especially on the tail end, that if you get your first frost on September 15th, the ground might be frozen by October 10th. So it
yeah.
goes very fast.
Hey there. Did you attend our EcoAg conference this year in Madison, Wisconsin? Well, if you didn't, or if you did, we've got the recordings now available. Get on-demand access to every session with the EcoAg recordings. Learn directly from the pioneers of soil health, livestock integration, and profitable regenerative systems, all at your own pace. Speakers include Gabe Brown, Alan Williams, John Kemp, Joel Salatin, and a lot more. We also have additional products that include the full-day workshops done by Matt Powers, John Kemp, Nigel Palmer, Jordan Green, Mark Shepard, and Austin Unruh. These workshops are in depth and will help you dig deep on the presenters' topics. Grab your recordings now at conference.eco-ag.com/24 recordings or find the link in the notes. Because the best investment you can make is in your own knowledge. Now back to the show. It happens quick. So what did you guys first start growing? Did you do just a normal growing season CSA to get started, and then
Mm.
how did you move into the winter
So
CSA?
I have been doing storage crops from like the time that I've been farming on my own. So I kept doing that. Before Alaska, I had run a small, like quarter acre, tiny part-time farm in Michigan in the UP doing storage crops, and that was like entirely practical. The reason that I was doing it there, it was just I was in school and didn't have time to do like a regular farm during the summer, and so that's what kind of pushed me into storage crops. So then when we moved to Fairbanks, it made perfect sense just to keep doing what I had been doing, and the market here was excited about it.
Yeah. So what? I guess let's talk about what are the best crops for winter
Oh, I
storage.
I think carrots are always king. In my opinion, and many other farmers. I think because customers can, you can really taste the difference between, uh, a locally grown carrot versus something that's coming from California or Mexico. They just taste better, and so customers are really really excited about carrots. You there's always the other kind of classic storage crops like your beets and squashes, onions and garlics and things like that, but carrots are really king in my opinion.
Yeah. So what would you how would you say your percentage of
Mm.
produce is? Like what is carrots like 60%?
It's about,
What all are you
yeah, I'd
providing?
say right now carrots are about a quarter of what I grow, and because for crop rotation purposes, I don't want it to get to be more than a third, so I can maintain at least a 3-year rotation. Um, Besides carrots, it's kind of an even mixture of a lot of different stuff, like all your brassica roots, turnips, rutabagas, radishes, cabbages, kohlrabis. There's squashes, of course, and beets and parsnips. So we grow a pretty wide variety of stuff, but a lot of it kind of grows in a similar way and gets harvested and processed in a similar way.
Right. What is the rotation that you use with carrots?
I'm trying to get, 3 years or 3 years between planting in a single spot. Um, I am trying, yeah, I guess I'm trying only other plant in that family in APACA is parsnips, and so I'm trying not to follow carrots with parsnips or have parsnips precede carrots, but I also try not to plant carrots where like the the larger above ground brassicas have been, and that's just a practical thing that um, I'm doing kind of a low till operation, and so the stalks get in the way of direct seeding and cultivation later on. Um, but other than that, I don't mind too much, who precedes and who comes after the carrots.
Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about the harvest and then, some of the key points that you guys try to follow to make sure that they stay fresh before you head to
Yeah.
storage?
Um, so like harvest on a commercial scale is something that really needs to be planned out well because I try to have my crops in storage for the least amount of time possible. Uh, Part of that is practical because obviously the less they're in storage, the better quality they're going to be. Um, but you're also if you're pushing harvest later, uh, the weather usually has cooled down a little bit, and so you're not running your coolers for as long, and you're bringing less field heat in. Um, and so yeah, I'm trying to, while harvesting, making sure that I have enough time to get everything in. That's like, yeah, that's super important. And that's a mixture of like making sure I have enough employees on hand and uh, having the machinery or systems in place to like have a harvest speed that's going to get me the time span that I need. Other than that, getting things cooled really quickly for the crops that really want to be cooled after they're harvested. That's super important. So having a refrigeration system that's beefy enough to do it, and being careful about ventilation and all those things. Yeah.
So when you came to design your storage facility, what are some of the things that previous experiences you
Hmm.
had or get people that had different guidance? I know part of the reason you wrote the book is because you just felt like there wasn't any great step-by-step guide to
Hmm.
do it. So what are some of the things that you found that are important, mistakes that you
Yeah.
made on developing that facility?
I think it's so. Yeah, like I said, like you said, there aren't or there weren't a lot of resources out there about building kind of like a commercial scale. I'll say root cellar with quotes around it. It doesn't have to be a root cellar. There's a farm outside Duluth called Food Farm. It's in Renshaw, run by Yannicke Fisher Merritt, and that farm uh, was kind of a big inspiration for me in designing my building and the way that I do storage. Uh, when I was still living in the Midwest, I went and visited the farm and talked with Yannicke a lot. And the way that they did it is they built kind of like a concrete walled bunker, insulated all the way around it and under the slab, and then kind of backfilled. And so it was like had the ground as a temperature buffer, but using more modern building materials like full concrete floors and drains and water and insulation in all the right places. And so I kind of took that idea or those principles to then my building. And if I could do it again, my building is it looks like a garage from the outside, but it's almost like you're building a walkout basement. I dug it into the hillside, and so the backside is like mostly surrounded by soil, and then the front is something that you can drive into. Um,
Is that south face or
it
north
is south
face?
facing, yeah.
Because you want it to stay insulated more in the winter than stay cool in the
Yeah,
summer.
exactly, because our winters are pretty extreme here. And I think in, regardless of where you live, a lot of insulation is going to be your friend if you're storing things. Like there's a whole group of crops that do best when they're stored right around 32 degrees. Uh, that's not potatoes, that's not winter squash, that's not sweet potatoes, but um, your carrots, beets, cabbages, those things want to be right at 32 degrees. And in most places, the ground is warmer than that. And so having a robust amount of insulation is going to help you out in many, many cases, protecting against, the outside conditions, but also from the ground itself. Like with my building, it was really a problem of money that I was, working on a limited loan amount, trying to fit into this loan category, the micro loan for the USDA, which is capped at 50 grand. Um, and so the back concrete wall isn't as tall as I'd like it to be. I was just trying to slice off pieces here and there to reduce the budget, and because I was building right in the middle of COVID as well, things were really expensive.
Yeah.
Um,
How do you keep the different temperatures that are needed
mhm.
in there? So if you have potatoes and carrots in the same facility,
Yeah, if you have, different crops that need different conditions, you need to provide them with different spaces or compromise and shorten their storage life, or in the case of potatoes, if you're storing them too cold like I do, you have to accept that they're going to sweeten up. Some customers might not like that. Um, in my case, like in the fall, I'm running a refrigeration system during harvest time. And shortly after harvest, the outside temperatures drop drop below freezing and then into the 20s and teens and lower. And I'm pulling in air from outside to keep the conditioned 32-degree space where it needs to be. Many farms outside of Alaska do a similar thing when outdoor temps are suitable, like below 25 or so. They're using outside air to cool, and then running a refrigeration system otherwise all through the winter.
how many? So when you break up
Mhm.
your acreage, you do have a summer CSA as
I
well,
don't, yeah. So I,
right?
I
Oh, we really don't. You
yeah,
just do a
yeah.
winter
And
one.
so if, I think I'm unusual and I don't have a summer CSA and do winter CSA. Um, so I'm snagging a lot of other farms' summer CSA customers. Uh, but that said, I have met plenty of farmers who have a summer CSA and then just continue their customer base into the wintertime.
What sort of financial? I guess if you were running both a summer and winter
Mhm.
CSA, what sort of or the type of work that it takes that would be added to that person's
Yeah,
plate, but on the flip side, what sort of financial benefit do you get? You obviously continue making money throughout the winter.
yeah. generally speaking, crops that are grown quickly in the summertime and harvested quickly, your salad mixes, lettuces, tomatoes, those types of things generally take more labor when they're in the ground to transplant out and maintain and harvest and process in the summertime. And so doing these long season storage crops like eliminates a big chunk of that labor. Your jobs are to bed prep or ground prep, plant, weed and cultivate and irrigate, and then they're just growing until it's harvest time. Uh, and so if you are doing a summer CSA and you eliminate, a chunk of kind of labor intensive crops that you'd otherwise be spending time growing and selling, you're kind of freeing up this time to either do something else or to reduce your overall workload and have fewer employees on hand. So you're kind of like I think of it like a normal farm has this big spike of work in the summer and then it comes back down, not much in the winter time, and you're kind of taking a lot of that big chunk of labor and just moving it to a different time. Um,
Yeah.
on an annual basis, I think if you're adding more ground, of course you're going to be bringing in more money. Um, I don't know necessarily if you're going to increase your bottom line if you're just moving, like moving something that was in summer production into more of a storage crop winter sales model. I think it can, because if you're reducing your summer workload enough that you don't need to have as many employees on. Uh, but I think overall the finances may not be that different, but you're just kind of changing like your workflow, your annual workflow on the farm.
I do feel like a lot of folks who do summer CSAs probably have another acre or
Mm-hmm.
two that they might not
Yeah,
cultivate
yeah,
either, that could be put into this type of winter
yeah, totally.
program.
I think if that's the case, then obviously it is a little bit more work to get all that ground prepped and do the planting and the weeding and all that and the irrigation setup. But once those crops are in and cultivated, they do spend a big chunk of the summer just kind of on autopilot, many of them.
And then are you guys pretty much set on your crops right now, or is there anything new that you're trying this year that you're experimenting
You know,
with?
I, onions have been a real challenge in interior Alaska. Part of that is a big part of that is a day length problem that uh, how you have short, medium, and long day onions, and many of the long day onion varieties, our days are too long for them, and so they end up bulbing up too early, and you end up with small onions.
Yeah, I hadn't even
Yeah,
thought about that issue with your
yeah.
days.
So finding the right varieties and has been a little bit of a challenge. So that's something I'm experimenting with. Kind of same with garlic. Fairbanks has a long-standing problem that if you're ordering garlic seed from the lower 48, it's not getting here until really close to freeze up. And so people here have a tendency to plant garlic really late. And I'm going to be doing some research on the farm this summer looking into earlier planting dates and see if that improves our winter survival.
Yeah, that's what other strange challenges do you have in Alaska? Because I hadn't even thought about the day length, but that I
Yeah,
mean, yeah, during growing season you're dealing with 22 hours of
yeah,
sunlight
yeah.
sometimes, right?
It's difficult to get things here. Uh, like when we were down in Wisconsin a few weeks ago, I was just like walking into a Tractor Supply or driving past these places with tractors on the lot and just kind of drooling. Uh, yeah, materials are hard to get, and when you are able to find them, they're expensive to ship here. That's just like a thing you need to get used to. Um,
Yeah.
you know,
What is the equipment that you
right
have
now I'm running on a
to do
BCS
everything?
two-wheel tractor, uh, and I'm very interested in upgrading to a small, like a compact, either John Deere or Kubota or something like that. But kind of waiting for the finances of starting the farm to line up. Maybe I think next year. is going to be the year.
Yeah. Has it do you feel like you guys are moving, you have a model that is something that can be successful over the next, 5, 10
Yeah, I
years?
do. Starting a farm is always difficult. The period of kind of like dealing with startup expenses while still trying to pay yourself for the work that you do. It's just like very difficult to get through that time. And we're just about through that now. And so, I feel like as the startup expenses and loans fall away, and as we're just continually improving our soil and yields are getting better and better, that the finances get better and better each year. Something
Yeah.
interesting about running storage crops, so like we're only cultivating an acre, and I hear of plenty of farms out there that are making a living for two people on an acre by growing kind of really high value and like work intensive crops. You couldn't I don't think it's possible to get two people's salary from an acre doing storage crops, just because they do take up more space and they're lower valued, per space and per weight. So if my wife wanted to join the farm, for example, we'd have to find additional land to make that happen.
Yeah. What has been the response from the community as far as your CSA customers? Was it fairly easy or simple to educate folks into, wanting this type of
hmm
product? And then what sort of feedback have you gotten
Yeah,
from them?
it was incredibly easy to get customers, and apart from a little bit of advertising that first year, past 3 or 4 years, I haven't, other than putting up, like Facebook posts, I don't really advertise at all. And I have long waiting lists for people to get onto the CSA. So people are excited about it. Um, yeah. What was the second part of the question? I'm sorry.
I think what has been like their response to it?
Yeah.
Was there any sort of like education or explanation on like the taste of the
Mm,
food? Was it different than what they'd experienced in the past? I'm sure it tastes much different than what they're getting out of a grocery
yeah.
store.
I mean, so from like the eating experience, it has been nothing but positive. That the quality of the stuff they're getting from me is almost always higher than what they can get from the grocery store. Part of that's where we are, that Fairbanks is kind of the end of the supply chain, so the stuff in the grocery store isn't always the best. From like a
You're right.
CSA experience perspective, I have had to help people and educate them on kind of how a winter CSA is different from a summer CSA. Uh, the things that you get, or the list of things that you can get late into the wintertime through storage, is a lot shorter than the list of things that you can grow in the summertime. And so it's a lot more about like supplying staples that people are used to using, like potatoes, carrots, onions, and there can be a few weird things in there, but it's not kind of like it's not the bonanza of weird things and greens and all that a summer CSA is.
Hey, eco farmers. This is Taylor Henry with Acres U.S.A. I hope you enjoy this podcast as much as I enjoy interviewing these folks. If you're serious about regenerative agriculture, I've got an incredible resource you need to check out, the Acres U.S.A. membership. You farm in the physical world, and you deserve a physical printed magazine to match. Since 1971, Acres U.S.A. magazine has been the leading voice in ecological agriculture, delivering the best insights from regenerative farmers, agronomists, and researchers to help you farm profitably without toxic chemicals. Our membership included physical and digital copies of the magazine each month of the year, which has always been a standard for Acres USA, but we wanted to over-deliver on content. When I acquired this business, I was happy to find that we had years of audio files from presentations at our annual EcoAg conference. And guess what? They were hiding. Well, not anymore. We developed this membership portal that gives you access to the recordings from farmers like Gabe Brown, Gary Zimmer, Joel Salatin, and Mark Shepard. We also include recordings of private events. Finally, if you are like me and you like listening to content, we are now producing a membership-only podcast of each issue of the magazine, so you can consume each article while you're out in the field. To make things even sweeter, you'll get discounts on books, workshops, and events to keep expanding your knowledge. So are you ready to take your farming to the next level? Join today for a ridiculously low price at eco-farming.com or see details in the notes. What's what's like the quick advice you would give someone that's looking to get into either expand their current CSA or dive headfirst into doing a winter CSA?
I mean, the advice that I have heard from several farmers, and I agree with this almost anything, is to start small, experiment small with it for a year or two. If you're past that and still thinking about continuing on, I am a big advocate for being really conservative in your planning for any farming, but winter storage farming especially, because storage is kind of like an additional level of risk beyond what most farms experience, because storage, like things can go wrong in storage. And so I tend to plan pretty pessimistically and plan for losses higher than I actually expect to get and likely will get. But it just means that I have excess at the end of the season rather than running out of things. So I would definitely tell people to plan pessimistically. It's plan for the worst, hope
Do
for
you
the
have like an
best.
alarm? Do you have a temperature alarm on your cooler?
At this point,
I guess what are some of the issues that you've seen? Like your coolers go out and all of a sudden it gets warm in
that
there?
I mean, yeah, that can happen. I do have alarms, and I think besides infrastructure failures and power outages and dealing with all that, and you can kind of set up redundancies in your system to deal with those things, and you should. Um, like pathogens you're bringing in from the field are a big issue. Like uh, white mold in carrots and beets. It's Sclerotinia is the genus of the fungus, and that can just like decimate carrots in storage. Hasn't happened to me, but I've heard of farms losing like 100,000 pounds of carrots in storage to a white mold outbreak, and so that's why I'm really careful
Hmm.
about rotations and like when I have things go bad in storage, I'm not composting those things to go back on the field. Anything that anything like trimmings and loss in storage that's going to feed pigs on other local farms because I don't want that anywhere near my field.
Got
Hmm.
it. In your book, you profile I think 9 different storage farms that you did some research with while
Yeah.
writing that book. What are some of the most interesting or surprising insights that you got from that
Hmm.
experience?
Yeah, I guess I was really surprised to find the places that people were storing crops in, especially in, you know, southern Wisconsin, and you can kind of apply that climate to across the board, the same latitude, that there are big successful storage farms just using their summer walk-in coolers or reefer trailers to store crops in the wintertime. I was so used to the model that Food Farm had created near Duluth in a little bit colder climate that you needed to have this like bunkered space. But yeah, there's a lot of farms doing storage successfully in these above ground summer cooler spaces. Um, I also spoke to a farm.
And when you say
Yep.
a reefer trailer, you mean like a kind of like a semi like a cold storage
Yeah.
type
Yeah.
trailer?
Those. Yep. Refrigerated tractor trailers. Um, there are farms that use them either on the ground or they keep them up on the trailers. And sometimes they're using the existing diesel cooling units, and sometimes they're putting in cool bots or walk-in cooler refrigeration into them. But it's a really inexpensive way to get into it, and I think a lot of the U.S. has a climate that can really deal with that, and people are using things like plug-in thermostats. Like Inkbird is a common brand. It's this small thermostat outlet that costs less than $50, and you can plug like a small space heater into that and keep a space above freezing pretty easily. easy, and it's inexpensive and doesn't really use that much energy to keep the space warm enough.
So in that scenario, would they would want to time their harvest, right before freezing becomes consistent, and then use the temperature to, keep the temperature down, but then also have something to boost temperature when it's
Yeah,
needed. So I'm assuming you don't want to take it out when it's still warm out, and then that room would then be
yeah.
warm before.
Like I guess I was surprised to see that um, with farms storing a lot of produce in walk-in coolers that, in the grand scheme of things, aren't that well insulated. That they still spend most of their winter like with their coolers running, because the veggies that they're putting into those coolers are still alive and respiring and generating a little bit of heat. And that's enough that, if it is in the 20s or 30s outside, there's still like enough heat being generated inside and not enough heat loss that you need to keep your coolers running through that time span. Yeah, that was a big surprise to me.
Was there any of these farms that had coolers for another purpose and then they repurposed it for
Many
winter
of them,
storage?
yeah, many of them use their summertime coolers for storage, for winter storage. A couple of them also have, uh, like auxiliary coolers with smaller cooling systems, because you don't need a super beefy cooling system to keep something at 32 during the winter time. They have those kind of ready to catch the excess coming from their large coolers once those fill up.
And then are there any new trends or innovations that you're seeing in this space that is something that could make your life easier in the
Hmm,
future?
interesting question. Um,
It's kind of a
yeah,
unique system.
yeah.
I don't know if there's that many innovators going out
I
there
mean,
and
I don't know if I would call it new, but I think that those plug-in thermostats, like I had mentioned, Inkbird is one brand, and I think Wilhi is a brand. They just make climate control so easy. They sell thermostats and humidistats, and it's really easy to program. You just plug whatever it is right into it, and boom, you're climate controlling a space. Yeah,
awesome. So do you have any final thoughts or takeaways for folks that are considering winter storage?
yeah. There's one thing I want to add to people using like their summertime cooler spaces for the winter time, is that they need to be careful about moisture and vapor barriers. When you're installing a vapor barrier, that you're always supposed to put it on the warm side to prevent condensation in your walls. And if you're using a cooler for the summertime, obviously the vapor barrier is on the wrong side if you want to use it in the wintertime, vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really difficult to kind of like DIY a cooler space that's going to work well in both the summer and the winter, because you need to create this perfect double vapor barrier that, if it fails, you're going to have a big problem. Uh, so in that case, if somebody is looking to do that kind of like double duty for a cooler space, I really recommend using like prefab cooler panels. Yeah. They're designed in a
Yeah.
way to deal with moisture issues like that.
All right. That
Yeah.
sounds cool. Where can people learn more or connect with you? I know your website is
Yep.
offbeatalaska.com. Your farm's called
Yep.
Offbeat Farm. Is there any other areas that people should follow you, reach out to you?
I think through the website is great. I'm trying
Yeah.
to be better at social media, but sometimes it's just hard to make myself care.
Yes.
Yeah.
I get it. And people, you guys can find Sam's book is on our website, Beyond the Root Cellar. We're excited to have that and look forward to meeting you in
Yeah,
person sometime,
likewise.
Sam. All right,
Yeah,
thanks for
thanks so
joining
much.
us. Thank you for listening to the Acres USA podcast, a podcast production of Acres USA. Find us on Spotify, Apple, Google Play, and other popular podcast platforms. Acres USA is North America's oldest publisher on production scale organic and regenerative farming. For more than 50 years, our mission has been to help farmers, ranchers, and market gardeners grow food profitably, regeneratively, and with nature in mind. Find our books and other Acres USA media and learn about Acres USA events at acresusa.com. Read our online magazine at members.acresusa.com, and we'd like to thank Acres USA staff for their contributions to producing this podcast. This episode was edited and engineered by Weston Larson of Acres USA. We're grateful to our guests for taking the time to talk with us about their experience.